Imagine a giant. And I don't mean, a fairy tale giant. I mean a geopolitical heavyweight. A country that is one of the oldest continuous states on the entire planet. We're talking about a place with a history that stretches back millennia, a massive cultural footprint, and what is it now? Over 120 million people.
It's a demographic and historical powerhouse.
Mm.
I mean, by almost every metric, this is a dominant player on the African continent.
Right. But here's the paradox, and honestly, it's a frustrating one. Imagine this giant is stuck in a room. It's a huge room filled with resources and people, but there are no doors that it owns. To leave the house, to trade with the world, to breathe the ocean air, it has to ask a neighbor for the keys. Every single time.
It's a very claustrophobic metaphor, but it captures the reality of Ethiopia perfectly.
It is a situation that drives policymakers up the wall. And today, we're doing a deep dive into a really high-stakes analysis. It's titled, Ethiopia Does Not Need a Coastline to Reach the Sea.
Which, let's be honest, is a pretty provocative title.
Incredibly provocative. Because if you read the headlines lately, the narrative is usually the exact opposite. It's always, Ethiopia must have a port, or Ethiopia deserves a port. But this source material is asking us to flip the script entirely. It's arguing that the obsession with owning a coastline is actually a trap.
And a dangerous one at that.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that danger. We're going to look at the difference between access and ownership, which, sounds like semantics, but as we'll see, it's really the difference between war and peace. We'll look at international law, the high cost of rhetoric, and finally a blueprint for how this region could actually work together.
It's essentially a roadmap from confrontation to cooperation. And frankly, for the Horn of Africa, the stakes really couldn't be higher.
So let's rewind a bit. We have to set the stage because you really can't understand the tension today without looking at the map. In 1993.
1993 is the absolute pivot point here. That's the year Eritrea gained independence. Before that moment, Ethiopia had coastline. It had navy bases. It had direct sovereign access to the Red Sea. When Eritrea separated, Ethiopia became the most populous landlocked country on Earth.
That is a heavy title to hold, most populous landlocked country. And the source material really emphasizes that this wasn't just, a logistical change. It was a psychological blow. It calls the loss painful for many Ethiopians.
Well, it is painful. Think about the national identity. If you see yourself as a great power, a civilizational heavyweight, as the text puts it, feeling locked in feels like a demotion. It feels vulnerable.
Vulnerable how? Because I think for the average listener, landlocked just sounds like an inconvenience. Like, okay, so you have to drive your trucks a bit further across a border. What's the big deal?
It's so much more than an inconvenience. It's a strategic choke point. When you're landlocked, you are dependent on your neighbors for every gallon of gas, every container of medicine, every single export you send out to the world. If that neighbor decides to hike up transit fees, you pay. If that neighbor has a civil war and the roads close, your economy just it strangles.
So it's an existential anxiety. You don't hold the keys to your own house.
Precisely. You don't control your own lifeline.
Okay, so I get the anxiety. And naturally, if you're a country with 120 million people and a growing economy, you start thinking, this doesn't make sense. We are too big for this. The source mentions that there's a feeling that history needs to be, quote, corrected.
And that's where the source drops the hammer. It validates the emotion. It says, yes, this hurts. It acknowledges the trauma of that separation, but then it pivots to the hard reality. It says, essentially, history cannot be undone without consequences.
That is the line that jumped out at me. Cannot be undone without consequences. It sounds almost ominous.
It's meant to be, because here's where we have to talk about international law. I think there's a common misconception, maybe even among some leaders, that because Ethiopia has this demographic weight or this historical empire, it somehow generates a legal right to a port. We need it, therefore we should have it.
It's the logic of necessity. If I'm starving, I have a right to food. If my economy is starving for a port, I have a right to the sea.
Morally, maybe you can argue that, but
Right.
legally, the source is crystal clear. No, international law is built on the concept of sovereignty. Borders are fixed. There's no clause in the UN Charter that says if your population hits 100 million, you get to annex a beach from your neighbor.
So size creates leverage, but it doesn't create rights.
Exactly. Whether you're a giant or a microstate, your neighbor's territory is off limits. And this is the core conflict the analysis identifies. The danger comes when you take access, which is a commercial interest, and you reframe it as a right.
Why is that distinction so important? Why does the word right change the temperature so much?
Because rights are non-negotiable. If I say, I would like to lease a port from you, we're talking business. We can haggle over the price. We can discuss terms. If I say, it is my right to have your port, I am challenging your existence.
Hmm.
I'm saying your sovereignty is secondary to my needs.
And that is not a business negotiation anymore.
No, that's a threat, an existential threat to the neighbor. And that brings us to the second part of this deep dive, the cost of rhetoric. The source has a whole section titled, "The Cost of Rhetoric is Higher Than It Appears."
This part was fascinating because usually we dismiss political speeches as just hot air, politicians posturing for their voters. But the source argues that in the Horn of Africa, words have a physical weight.
They do. When Ethiopian leaders use phrases like reclaiming the sea, or talk about access as a natural right, or refer to the Red Sea as their natural boundary, the neighbors don't hear a pitch for economic integration. They hear war drums.
They hear, "We are coming for your land."
Right. And you have to look at the neighborhood. We aren't talking about the European Union here. The Horn of Africa is, let's call it fragile.
That is putting it mildly. The source lists the issues: unresolved border disputes, active militant groups, civil conflicts. It is a powder keg.
It's a powder keg. And now throw in global power competition. You have the Red Sea, which is one of the world's most vital shipping lanes. Everyone from the U.S. to China to the Gulf states has a military presence there.
So if you light a match in this room, you aren't just blowing up your own house, you're setting the whole block on fire.
That is the domino effect the source warns about.
Yeah.
Even if the rhetoric is just symbolic, even if there's no actual plan to invade anyone, it triggers what we call the security dilemma.
I've heard that term before. Break that down for us. The security dilemma.
Sure. It's a classic concept in international relations. Let's say I'm your neighbor. You say, I need a port by any means necessary. You might just mean you want a strong trade deal. But I get scared. I assume the worst. So I buy a tank to defend my port. You see me buy a tank and you think, oh, he's aggressive, he's preparing for war. So you buy 2 tanks.
And suddenly we're in an arms race that neither of us actually wanted. We're both just reacting to fear.
Exactly. And the source argues that this is already happening. Alliances are hardening against Ethiopia. Neighbors are getting nervous and grouping together. And the tragedy is this drains resources that are desperately needed for other things.
The source has a laundry list of these costs. It mentions draining development funds, scaring off investors.
The investor point is huge. Ethiopia has spent the last decade trying to rebrand itself as the manufacturing hub of Africa. They want foreign capital. They want factories. They want to be the next Asian tiger economy. But money is cowardly.
Money is cowardly. I like that.
It is. If an investor hears potential war in the Red Sea, they don't look at the details. They don't check if it's just rhetoric. They just pull their capital and go to Vietnam or Bangladesh instead. The risk premium goes through the roof.
So by shouting about how much you need a port to help your economy, you might actually be destroying your economy.
That is the irony. And the source sums it up with a line that I think should be on a billboard. No port is worth that price.
It's a brutal cost-benefit analysis. Is owning a strip of sand worth isolation, war, and economic collapse? The answer is obviously no. But the problem remains. Ethiopia is still landlocked. It still has 120 million people. It still needs to move goods. We can't just say calm down and ignore the economic reality, so what's the alternative?
This is where the deep dive pivots to the solution. And it's the concept we touched on earlier. Access versus ownership.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think historically nations did fight for ports. That was the game. If you wanted to be a power, you needed a navy and a coast.
In the 19th century, yes. If you wanted to trade, you planted your flag. But the source argues that the 21st century works differently. Modern trade depends on logistics, not sovereignty. You don't need to own the dirt to ship the box.
The source brings up some examples here to prove this isn't just wishful thinking.
Right. It points to countries like Switzerland, Austria, Botswana. Look at Switzerland. It's an economic powerhouse. It exports massive amounts of high-value goods. It has no coastline. It has no navy.
But it has neighbors who aren't. Well, it's in Europe. It's stable.
That is a fair point. The context is different. But the mechanism is the same. How does Switzerland do it? They have guaranteed transit agreements. They have long-term leases on terminals in Rotterdam. They use something called dry ports.
Define that for us. What is a dry port?
A dry port is basically an inland terminal that connects to a seaport by rail or road. You do all your customs, all your paperwork, all your loading right there in your own country. Then you put it on a train, it zips across the border to the ship and leaves. As far as the logistics are concerned, you virtually have a seaport.
So you extend the functionality of the port into your own territory, without moving the border.
Exactly. And the source argues Ethiopia is already doing this. They trade successfully through Djibouti. But the problem is they're over-reliant on Djibouti.
They're putting all their eggs in one basket.
And Djibouti knows it, so they can charge high fees. The solution isn't invasion, it's diversification. The source lists the options: Eritrea, Somaliland, Somalia, Sudan, Kenya.
It's a buffet of options, really.
It is. Imagine if Ethiopia negotiated access deals with all of them. Suddenly it's a buyer's market. If Djibouti charges too much, you ship through Kenya. If Kenya has a traffic jam, you ship through Somaliland.
And the key here, the aha moment for me, is that you can do all of this without moving a single border post. You don't have to challenge anyone's sovereignty.
That's the crux of it. Stability creates prosperity. If you invade a neighbor to take a port, congratulations, you now own a port. But that port is now in a war zone. No insurance company will cover ships going there. No major shipping line will dock there. You've captured a ghost town?
Stability creates prosperity, not coastline ownership. It requires a huge shift in perspective. It requires looking at the map not as territory to be conquered, but as a network to be connected.
And that shift requires a specific kind of leadership.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the final, and I think most inspiring, section of this analysis: redefining leadership for the future.
I love this part because it stops being about logistics and starts being about philosophy. The source spends some time analyzing what Ethiopia actually brings to the table. We keep talking about its needs, but what about its assets?
Right. The source argues that Ethiopia needs to stop acting like a victim of geography and start acting like the regional heavyweight it is. It has immense human capital. It has diplomatic weight. Addis Ababa is the headquarters of the African Union, remember?
It's the diplomatic capital of the continent.
Exactly. These are tools of influence. You don't need a gunboat to exert power if you have economic gravity.
There's a line in the text that defines true leadership in a way I hadn't thought about. It says true leadership is not taking what you can.
No, it says true leadership is choosing what you do not need to.
Choosing what you do not need to. Unpack that.
It means restraint. It means having the military strength to threaten your neighbors, but choosing diplomacy instead. That shows confidence. That builds trust. When a giant acts gentle, everyone relaxes. When a giant acts aggressive, everyone panics.
So if Ethiopia steps back from this give us a port or else rhetoric, it positions itself as the grown-up in the room, the stabilizer.
The anchor. And the source paints a vision of what this anchor Ethiopia could build. It calls it the Red Sea Horn Economic Compact.
This sounds like a Marshall Plan for the Horn of Africa. What does it look like practically?
Imagine a web of infrastructure. Railways that connect Addis Ababa to Mogadishu to Asmara to Nairobi. But, and here's the key, these aren't just Ethiopian trains running on foreign land. They are jointly owned ventures.
So everyone has skin in the game.
Exactly. If Ethiopia and Somalia jointly own the rail line and the port terminal, both countries have a massive financial incentive to keep the peace. You don't bomb the tracks that make you rich.
It reminds me of the European coal and steel community. That was the seed of the EU. They bound the French and German economies together so tightly that war became impossible.
That is exactly the parallel. It's functionalism. You start with the boring customs harmonization, shared logistics zones, maybe a joint maritime security force to fight piracy. And slowly, those functional links build a political peace.
And the force argues that this vision places Ethiopia right at the center.
Yes, Ethiopia becomes the hub, the transit point, the manufacturing engine. It achieves dominance not by conquering the coast, but by becoming the indispensable partner to everyone on the coast.
There's a quote here that sums it up beautifully. History remembers builders longer than conquerors.
It's a profound observation. Conquerors make headlines. They draw lines on maps. But builders, they create civilizations that last. They create systems that feed people. And that is really the choice Ethiopia is facing.
It feels like a genuine crossroads, and the source makes it clear that the window to make this choice doesn't stay open forever.
No, it doesn't. The analysis concludes by laying out the two paths very starkly. Path A leads to suspicion. It leads to arms races. It leads to a region where everyone is armed to the teeth and no one is trading.
And Path B?
Path B leads to partnership. It leads to influence. It leads to sustainable growth. But it requires that difficult mental shift. You have to accept that you don't need to own the beach to enjoy the water.
That is the vital distinction. The source emphasizes that in a tough neighborhood, peaceful cooperation is often mistaken for weakness. People think, oh, you're negotiating because you're scared.
But the source argues it's actually foresight. It's seeing the trap before you step in it.
Foresight, playing the long game.
Exactly. Because the alternative is just too costly. We discussed the fragility of the region. If you trigger a conflict here, it's not going to be a neat, short skirmish. It will be a generational disaster.
It's really a call for Ethiopia to recognize its own strength. You don't need to force your way in if you make yourself so valuable that people open the door for you.
That is the economic compact in a nutshell. Make the neighbors want your trade. Make them dependent on your transit fees. That is security. That is true access.
Bringing it all back to the listener, we started with this paradox of the landlocked giant. We looked at the legal reality that size doesn't equal rights. We saw how dangerous the rhetoric can be. And we've ended on this vision of a shared economic future.
It's a compelling argument. It asks the leadership and the people to look past the immediate emotional pain of the map and look toward the functional reality of the future.
It's asking them to choose being a builder.
And that's a choice that defines nations.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with the final thought from the source material. It's something that really stuck with me, and I think it captures the stakes perfectly.
It is a poignant closing.
The source says, "The sea will still be there tomorrow. The only question is whether the region will be at peace when they finally reach it."
That's the ultimate question. Access means nothing if the road to the sea is burning.
A huge thank you for helping us navigate this complex topic today.
My pleasure. It is a vital conversation to have.
And thank you for listening to this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.